John Heilemann is the co-managing editor of Bloomberg Politics. Good enough to join us on this primary Tuesday, the latest in perhaps a long list of do or die, last stand, all crucial primaries. But for Ted Cruz now, John, who in the last week has found himself a running mate, has gotten the endorsement of Indiana Governor Mike Pence, has a lukewarm alliance with John Kasich, all these gambits.
And went to the Hoosiers High School and referred to the basketball ring rather than hoops. So that was about as good. That's a kind of a metaphor for how well all the rest of these things have worked out for Ted Cruz so far in the last week. Not that well.
So then what to make of the reality of a situation that saw a 6 to 7% separation in the polls now grow to 14, 15, 16%?
Make the reality of the fact that Donald Trump is, a runaway freight train on his way to the Republican nomination. Trump had his moment of crisis in Wisconsin. And, it really was a moment where people looked up and said, wow, you can imagine if this is the way things are going to go now, if the never Trump forces have found the golden ticket, have found the key that unlocks how do we stop Donald Trump, the delegate math can get really hard for him. He was lucky, Trump, that he had New York coming up after Wisconsin, which allowed him to regather himself up, right his ship to some extent, bring in a bunch of new professionals into his orbit, find a new message, and then win that state decisively, and then have a bunch of these northeastern states that voted last week. So suddenly it's like after the moment of crisis, he crossed his Rubicon, whatever the cliched, hackneyed metaphor you want. And now he's suddenly in a situation where he's swept all those states, put himself in a good position in terms of the delegate math, and goes to Indiana, which is a state that's winner take all by congressional district and by state. And if he wins as big as these margins in the polls suggest,
he could have most, if not all.
He could get most, if not all, of those delegates tonight. And if that happens, all he has to do is win about 40%. 40% of the remaining delegates through to the end. And that just puts not just Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz, John Kasich, and the whole loose coalition, federation of never Trump forces. It puts them in a position where it's not impossible for them to stop Donald Trump from getting to 1,237, but he is on track to get there without much difficulty.
And now for Donald Trump, we are still hearing lying Ted references, but we're now hearing as many, if not more, crooked Hillary references. Perhaps this is his signal that he is pivoting. So it will look different tomorrow if the polls, if what they suggest happens.
It will look different. I think there's a chance, if Trump wins by 15 or 20 points tomorrow, right, and takes all the delegates in Indiana, there's a chance that Ted Cruz will get out of the race.
There is.
There's a chance. I mean, he may decide to fight all the way to the end. There's a chance John Kasich will get out of the race. But I think what's certain is that Donald Trump will roll out some big endorsements over the next 4 days. They've been waiting for this in the professional realm of the newly professionalized realm of the Trump campaign, the Paul Manafort wing of the Trump campaign. They have had their sights on Indiana for about 2 weeks. And so they have endorsements in their pocket. They have stuff to do. Wednesday, tomorrow, is going to be a big day for them, not just because they may win this race today in a big way, but because they will then run a flag up and say, guys, this race is over, and here's some evidence that the party is starting to come together behind Trump, that the party's not fighting, not resisting anymore. I guarantee you there will be one endorsement by the end of this week, and likely tomorrow, if Trump wins big tonight, that will make people say, that's a big visible sign that the party is like, whether enthusiastically or with a sense of resignation, is like saying, okay, this is inevitable now. It's time to deal with the fact that Donald Trump's going to be our nominee.
But Donald Trump will then also have to deal with historic unfavorability numbers as he looks to the general. 66% unfavorability. It's the highest all time since the question was first asked in 1984 for the GOP. A negative 38 net favorability rating. It's like getting over a mountain and then seeing Everest in front of you.
Look, Donald Trump has managed to win this nomination over the course of the last year in this dominating fashion. You can't but kind of take your hat off to a guy who came into this race with no political experience, and for most of the race had nobody around him who'd ever run a presidential campaign before, was making every decision on his own. It's a miracle what he's pulled off. And yet, he's also done himself extraordinary damage over the course of this time with huge segments of the American electorate, right? We focused for a long time on the Hispanic problem. 70% of Hispanics saying they didn't like Donald Trump. You can't win a general election if you don't win at least close to 40% of Hispanics. Now he's got the same problem with women. And Hispanics are really a big, important part of the American electorate. Women are bigger, more important part of the American electorate, and you're running against the woman who is going to be throughout representing potentially the first female president of the United States. So Trump has massive problems with huge, important, decisive parts of the American electorate. Can he fix them? Can he change those perceptions? There's months to play, you know. I don't put anything beyond the realm of possibility. But if you say your metaphor is perfect, you climb this big hill, you crest the hill, you want to take a big breath, and then you look up and there's there's Mount Krakatoa and Mount Everest like facing you to the south and the north, and there's not really a pass in between. You know, he's got a lot of work to do to get himself to a point where he can be competitive. And again, remember, there's a reason that even if you're not Donald Trump, Democrats have won 5 of the last 6 popular votes in America. Whoever the Democratic nominee is starts with about 240, 250 electoral votes. You only need 270. Republicans start with about 100, 120. You need about 150. So even if you're the most attractive Republican candidate in the world, you start with a huge disadvantage. Trump is not the most attractive Republican candidate in the world to a general election electorate.
He has a woman problem, and that woman problem has intensified perhaps in the last few days. It has also meant millions of dollars in Hillary Clinton's coffers just selling
the woman cards.